Are you sure you can afford this? The words, laced with disdain, echoed through the grand restaurant. The soft chime of glasses, the quiet murmur of conversation, everything seemed to pause. At the center of it all stood a 12-year-old boy. His school uniform was neat but clearly worn. His sneakers, once white, now bore the marks of countless steps. He wasn't the kind of guest this place was used to, and everyone could see it. The waitress smirked, arms crossed, waiting for his reaction. The boy didn't flinch. He didn't lower his gaze. Then the doors swung open. A man stepped in. He didn't need an introduction. LeBron James. The moment he entered, the mood in the restaurant shifted. Conversations died. Eyes widened. Someone audibly gasped. LeBron's gaze scanned the room, then landed on his son. And in that instant, everything changed. LeBron's footsteps were slow but deliberate as he approached his son. The silence in the room deepened with every step. Placing a hand on the boy's shoulder, he turned to the waitress. His expression was unreadable. His voice, however, was steady. Is there a problem here? The waitress's smirk faltered. She looked around, as if searching for an escape. I didn't know. LeBron tilted his head slightly. Didn't know what? The restaurant manager, a balding man in a crisp suit, rushed over. Mr. James, I assure you, this is just a misunderstanding. LeBron raised a hand, cutting him off. His eyes never left the waitress. My son walked in here. He asked for a menu. And instead of serving him, you questioned if he could afford it. The waitress's face turned pale. The other guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. And now, LeBron continued, his voice even, I want to know why. LeBron James didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to slam his fists or demand an apology. All he had to do was stand there. And in that moment, the silence in the restaurant became deafening. The air was thick with unspoken words. Every single guest, some pretending to be uninterested, others openly staring, felt the weight of the moment. The waitress, who just seconds ago had been brimming with smug confidence, was now frozen. Her face paled as reality set in. She had humiliated a boy in front of a room full of people. A boy who, as it turned out, wasn't just anyone. He was LeBron James's son. And now, she had to answer for it. LeBron took a step forward. His eyes locked onto the waitress with a calm intensity that was far more powerful than any outburst could ever be. Is there a problem here? His voice was low, steady, yet it reverberated through the room like a drumbeat. The waitress flinched. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. What could she even say? She had just mocked the son of one of the most influential athletes on the planet. The manager, sensing the disaster unfolding in front of him, practically sprinted toward the scene. His face was ghost white as he stammered, Mr. James. Please, this is. LeBron didn't even glance at him. His focus remained on her. I asked you a question, LeBron repeated, his voice still calm. Is there a problem here? The restaurant was dead silent now. A waiter at a nearby table had stopped pouring a guest's wine, and the deep red liquid had begun overflowing onto the white tablecloth, but no one noticed. The couple at the table near the entrance, who had been arguing about something trivial just moments before, had completely forgotten their conversation. A young man, still holding his fork halfway to his mouth, hadn't moved in over a minute. Every single person in that room was waiting to see how the waitress would respond. Waiting to see what LeBron James would do next. And most of all, waiting to see just how badly this woman had messed up. The waitress swallowed hard. I didn't know he was your son, she finally blurted out, her voice cracking. Wrong answer. LeBron blinked, as if processing what he had just heard. My son? His tone was so quiet now that it was almost dangerous. So you're saying it would have been okay to talk to him like that if he wasn't my son? The waitress froze. She had backed herself into a corner. LeBron James wasn't just calling her out. He was holding up a mirror, forcing her to see herself exactly as she was. And the entire restaurant was watching. LeBron exhaled slowly and shook his head. You see that table over there? He asked, gesturing toward a group of well-dressed businessmen laughing over expensive steaks. The waitress nodded hesitantly. Did you ask them if they could afford it? She immediately shook her head. No, sir. Why not? The silence was suffocating. The waitress had no answer. Because there was only one answer. She had judged his son not by his actions, not by his words, but by his appearance. And now, the weight of that realization was crushing her. The guests in the restaurant, who had been desperately trying to remain casually interested, finally started to whisper. Did she really just say that? I bet she's regretting every decision she made today. Oh man, this is about to get real bad for her. The manager wiped sweat from his forehead. He knew this wasn't something that could be swept under the rug. He also knew that in a matter of hours, this would be all over social media. LeBron turned his gaze back to his son. You okay? He asked. The boy, still calm, nodded. Yeah, you sure? The boy hesitated, then nodded again. Yeah, I just don't think I want to eat here anymore. LeBron smiled for the first time that night. Smart choice. Then, slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick wad of $100 bills. The room went silent again. LeBron didn't even glance at the waitress as he placed the money on the counter. That should cover whatever he wanted to order. And a tip. The waitress stared at the money like it was poison. The manager looked like he wanted to pass out. LeBron nodded once, then turned back to his son. Let's go. As LeBron James and his son walked out of the restaurant, the entire room remained frozen. No one dared to speak. The manager collapsed into a chair, running a hand through his hair. He already knew what was coming. The Yelp reviews, the news articles, the social media storm. The restaurant's reputation was finished. And the waitress? She had just learned a lesson she would never forget. Because for the rest of her life, she would be known as the woman who questioned if LeBron James's son could afford a meal. The waitress opened her mouth, then closed it again. She was stuck. She could feel the eyes of the entire restaurant on her. The powerful businessmen, the socialites, the journalists who might be here for an innocent dinner, but now had a far more interesting story unfolding in front of them. LeBron didn't move, he didn't raise his voice. But the pressure in the room was suffocating. Finally, she managed a weak, I just assumed. LeBron let out a small chuckle. Not of amusement. You assumed. A short pause. You see that table over there? LeBron gestured toward a group of men in suits. Did you ask them if they could afford it? The waitress swallowed. No, sir. Why not? No answer. The lesson was hitting her now, hard. And the entire restaurant was watching. The stack of bills sat motionless on the counter. But to the waitress, it felt like it was glaring at her. She couldn't look away. The entire restaurant had gone eerily silent, the weight of the moment pressing down like a lead blanket. Every second stretched out painfully, amplifying the growing tension. LeBron's words still echoed in her ears. That should cover whatever he wanted to order. And a tip. She felt the heat rise in her face. The worst part? It wasn't just the money on the counter. It was the fact that he hadn't even acknowledged her when he put it there. No eye contact, no anger, no yelling, just cold, effortless power. And now, she was alone in the wake of the storm she had created. A bead of sweat trickled down the back of her neck. She could feel them all watching. The businessmen near the bar, the socialites in their designer dresses, the young couple who had stopped eating mid-bite. They weren't just looking at her. They were judging her. It was a shift in power so sudden, so absolute, that she felt naked under their stares. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Seconds ago, she had been the one in control, the one smirking, the one making assumptions. Now, she was the fool in the middle of the room, with nowhere to hide. Somewhere in the room, a voice barely above a whisper. Wow, she really screwed up. It was quiet, subtle, but it hit like a sledgehammer. Her throat tightened. The murmurs began to spread. Did you see how fast her face changed? She picked the wrong kid to mess with. God, imagine being her right now. It wasn't just humiliation anymore. It was complete exposure. Every guest had become a witness to her downfall. And she couldn't stop it. She turned to her manager, hoping, praying, that he would step in. But when she saw his face, she knew. There was no saving this. His lips were pressed into a tight line, sweat beading at his temple. He wasn't looking at her, his eyes were locked on the stack of cash. Not out of greed, out of pure panic. Because he knew, by the time the clock struck midnight, this moment would be on every social media platform. The headlines would write themselves. Revolving light. LeBron James exposes restaurant for discrimination. Revolving light. The Yelp reviews? Done. The reputation? Destroyed. Her job? Over. She had messed up. But she had no idea just how badly. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She pulled it out, hands trembling slightly. Notification. 127 missed messages. Her breath hitched. She unlocked the screen. Twitter. Trending #1 LeBron James restaurant incident. Her stomach dropped. It had only been 10 minutes. And it was already happening. Click. A guest at the far end of the restaurant had snapped a picture of her. She saw it happen. Saw the flash. Saw the smug look on his face as he uploaded it to his Instagram story in real time. Caption. This woman just questioned if LeBron James's son could afford a meal. Guess she found out. She barely had time to process it before another notification hit. Facebook Live. LeBron James' son disrespected by waitress. 14K viewers. Her heart pounded in her ears. She wasn't just losing her job. She was becoming a meme. A joke. A lesson for the world to point at. And no matter what she did now, no apology, no explanation, it wouldn't matter. She had seen other people get dragged like this before. It happened all the time. A barista somewhere makes a rude comment to the wrong person? Viral. A customer service representative gets caught on video being rude? Viral. A security guard mistreats someone important? Viral. She had laughed at those stories. Never once thinking she'd be the next one. But now, she was standing exactly where they had stood. And for the first time in her life, she understood. Not just the embarrassment, not just the regret, but the fear. Because once the internet turns on you, it never forgets. She couldn't be here anymore. She turned to her manager, voice barely above a whisper. I need to go. He didn't even stop her. Didn't argue. Didn't try to defend her. He just let out a long breath and nodded toward the back. Take the side exit. And that was it. She grabbed her coat and walked away. Head down. Shoulders tense. The entire restaurant watched her leave. And as she stepped outside, the cold night air hitting her skin, she realized something. This wasn't just one bad night at work. This was the night her entire life changed. And she had no one to blame but herself. LeBron turned to his son. Do you still want to eat here? The boy thought for a second, then shook his head. No. LeBron nodded. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick stack of $100 bills. Without looking at the waitress, he placed them on the counter. That should cover whatever he wanted to order. And a tip. Then he turned, looking directly at the manager. Keep it. The manager looked stunned. Sir, we won't be eating here, LeBron said simply. But maybe this will remind you to hire people who know how to treat everyone with respect. With that, he turned, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. Together, they walked toward the exit. But the night wasn't over yet. The restaurant still hadn't recovered from what had just happened. The waitress was gone, but the tension still hung in the air like thick smoke. LeBron James stood there, his presence still dominating the room. His son stood beside him, composed but thoughtful. And then came the question. A simple question, but one that changed everything. Do you still want to eat here? It wasn't just a question about food. It was a test, a moment that would define what came next. And his son knew it. For a moment, the boy didn't respond. He glanced around the restaurant. The polished marble floors, the velvet seats, the golden glow of chandeliers. It was beautiful. It was expensive. It was everything society said he should aspire to be part of. And yet, right now, it felt rotten. The whispered judgments, the entitled glances, the way the room only changed when his father walked in. He saw it all now. And he understood. No. His voice was clear, stronger than before. I don't want to eat here anymore. The second those words left his mouth, the restaurant exhaled. A waiter near the kitchen door let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. A couple near the bar exchanged nervous glances, suddenly aware that they had been part of the problem. The manager stiffened. This wasn't just about one bad waitress anymore. This was a statement, a rejection. LeBron James's son wasn't just leaving. He was choosing to walk away from their world. And the world was watching. LeBron nodded, his expression unreadable. Then, without looking at the manager, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick stack of bills. $100 bills. Crisp, fresh, a sum larger than what most guests in the restaurant would pay for their entire meal. And then, he dropped it onto the counter. The sound was sharp, final. That should cover whatever he wanted to order. And a tip. The manager blinked. The money sat there, untouched. Because now, no one wanted to touch it. The manager was drowning. He could already see the headlines forming in his head. Revolving light. LeBron James walks out of restaurant over discrimination. Revolving light. Revolving light. NBA legend teaches a priceless lesson in respect. Revolving light. And he knew, nothing could fix this now. Unless he could convince them to stay. Mr. James, he started, forcing a nervous smile. Please, let's not blow this out of proportion. It was just a misunderstanding. LeBron turned to him slowly. The manager froze mid-sentence. That look. It was the look of a man who had nothing left to say. Because the truth was already out. LeBron sighed. A misunderstanding. He shook his head. You know, I was going to let this go. The manager swallowed. I was going to walk out, take my son somewhere else, and move on. Silence. But now? LeBron turned to his son. Champ, do you think this was a misunderstanding? His son didn't hesitate. No. And the restaurant felt that answer. It wasn't just the waitress. It was all of them. The people who watched. The people who laughed. The people who said nothing at all. They were just as guilty. And now, they were paying for it. LeBron placed a hand on his son's shoulder. And together, they turned toward the door. No rush. No theatrics. Just quiet, undeniable power. As they walked, the restaurant felt smaller. Less important. Less exclusive. Because what good is a place built for the elite, if the most elite man in the room doesn't even want to be there? The second they stepped outside, the air felt different. Cool. Free. LeBron looked down at his son, studying him for a moment. Proud of you, he said. His son smiled. Proud of you too. And with that, they walked into the night. Behind them, the restaurant doors swung shut. And inside, the world kept turning. But nothing would ever be the same. By the time LeBron and his son reached their car, the whispers inside the restaurant had turned into full-fledged conversations. People were texting, tweeting, taking pictures of the money left on the counter. It didn't take long before the first headlines appeared. Revolving light breaking. NBA star LeBron James calls out restaurant for discrimination. Revolving light. Within hours, social media was on fire. Comments flooded in. This is why I love LeBron. Imagine treating his son like that. Bet that waitress is regretting her life choices now. The restaurant? Their Yelp reviews were already plummeting. And the waitress? She hadn't even begun to feel the full consequences yet. The second LeBron James and his son stepped out of the restaurant, the entire room exhaled. But it wasn't a sigh of relief. It was the realization that something irreversible had just happened. The tension that had gripped the restaurant didn't fade. If anything, it grew heavier, like a storm cloud about to break open. The staff exchanged nervous glances. The guests, some pretending to return to their meals, others still gripping their utensils midair, weren't fooling anyone. Because they all knew. They had just witnessed something that the rest of the world would soon see too. The manager hadn't moved. He stood behind the counter, his eyes locked onto the untouched stack of $100 bills LeBron had left behind. The waitress's absence still lingered in the air, like the scent of burnt toast. The money sat there, a symbol of everything that had just gone wrong. Someone coughed awkwardly. A waiter near the bar fumbled with a tray, sending a wine glass shattering to the floor. Still, no one spoke. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. It started with a single tweet. A guest, sitting 2 tables away from the incident, had been filming the entire thing. They uploaded the video within minutes. Cell phone with arrow at NBA Insider. LeBron James just walked out of restaurant name after his son was treated like garbage. You won't believe what happened. Watch this. Attached was the video. 28 seconds of pure, career-ending disaster. And within minutes, the numbers started climbing. 1,000 views. 5,000 views. 10,000 views. And then, fire trending. Hashtag LeBron James restaurant incident. Social media detonated like an atomic bomb. Fire. Imagine questioning if LeBron James's son can afford a meal. This waitress just ruined her life. Fire. This is why rich people act different. They see us and assume we don't belong. Glad LeBron checked them. Fire. I was just there last week. Never going back. And then the big accounts got involved. ESPN, Bleacher Report, CNN. Within an hour, the restaurant's name was plastered across every major platform. And the damage? Irreversible. Back inside the restaurant, the manager was in hell. His phone was ringing non-stop. Corporate was calling. Reporters were calling. Legal was calling. The restaurant's PR team had already sent 3 urgent emails demanding an explanation. And there was no good one. He pulled out his phone and opened Twitter. The restaurant's account had gone from 4.7 stars to 2.1 stars in less than an hour. New reviews were flooding in. Pushpin, I wasn't even there, but I wouldn't step foot in this place after what I saw. Pushpin, racist, classist, trash, hope they go bankrupt. Pushpin, would rather eat gas station sushi than give this place a dime. The manager ran a shaking hand through his hair. We're screwed. The phone rang again. This time, it wasn't corporate. It was worse. It was a lawyer. This is a legal representative for Mr. James. I need to speak with you immediately. The manager swallowed hard. Yes, sir. Of course. Right away. He stepped into his office, slamming the door behind him. His knees nearly gave out as he sat down. Because he knew. This wasn't just bad press anymore. This was a legal disaster waiting to happen. Jessica, formerly the restaurant's most confident waitress, was curled up on her couch, her phone vibrating every few seconds. She didn't want to look. But she had to. She unlocked the screen. Her face was everywhere. Someone had taken a screenshot of her mid-smirk, frozen in time. And now? Now she was a meme. Fire. The face you make when you realize you just disrespected the GOAT's son. Fire. When you play stupid games and win stupid prizes. Fire. She really thought she was untouchable skull. Her stomach twisted. Her name was trending. Her personal Instagram had been found. Her Facebook. Even her old high school yearbook photo was circulating. And then, revolving light. Jessica, last name, reportedly fired from restaurant name after LeBron James incident. Revolving light. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes. She knew she had messed up. But she never thought it would destroy her life. And now, she had no way to escape it. By the next morning, the restaurant's rating had plummeted to 1.3 stars. Reservations were canceled by the hundreds. A local news station showed up at the front doors, cameras rolling. And then, the final nail in the coffin. Revolving light statement from LeBron James. Revolving light. Cell phone with arrow. My son deserves respect. Everyone does. We will not support businesses that treat people differently based on how they look. Do better. 6 million likes. 24 million views. And just like that, the restaurant was done. The next morning, Jessica, the waitress, walked into work feeling sick. The restaurant manager was waiting for her. His face was grim. We need to talk. She already knew what was coming. The internet had torn her apart overnight. There were videos of her comment. Screenshots of people calling for a boycott. Even the local news had picked up the story. Corporate isn't happy, the manager said. And neither are our customers. Jessica swallowed. Am I fired? He sighed. What do you think? Jessica woke up to the sound of her phone vibrating nonstop. For a second, she thought it was her alarm. Then she realized it wasn't. She blinked, still groggy, and reached for her phone. The screen was flooded with notifications. Speech balloon. Is this really you? Damn, girl, you messed up. Speech balloon. Hope you never get a job again. Disgusting behavior. Speech balloon. Imagine ruining your whole life over a power trip. LMAO. Her stomach twisted. It wasn't a nightmare. This was real. And it was only getting worse. She forced herself to open Twitter. Her name was everywhere. Revolving light trending. Hashtag LeBron James restaurant incident. Revolving light. Fire. Remember her face. This is what happens when you judge people by their looks. Fire. She thought she was untouchable. Now she's unemployed. Fire. I'm at the restaurant right now. Empty. They're done. Jessica's hands shook. It wasn't just Twitter. Instagram. Facebook. Even TikTok. People were stitching the video of her with reactions. Some were making parodies of the way she had spoken to LeBron's son. Some were saying she should never work in hospitality again. Some were calling her racist, classist, every word imaginable. Her own face was being used as a joke. And the worst part? She couldn't stop it. She tried to breathe. Okay, I just need a new job. That's all. She opened her laptop, clicked on her resume, started filling out applications for new restaurants, hotels, anywhere that would take her. But then she saw the email from her last job application before this all happened. Outgoing mail subject. Application status update. Dear Jessica, we regret to inform you that after reviewing your application, we have decided to move forward with another candidate. Her chest tightened. Then she saw another email. Outgoing mail subject. Urgent, removal from hiring process. Due to recent events, we are unable to continue with your application at this time. She hadn't even applied there recently. They had seen her name. And they didn't want her. Her career was over before she even had a chance to save it. Meanwhile, at the restaurant's corporate headquarters, a crisis meeting was already underway. The CEO, a man in his 60s with perfectly combed silver hair, sat at the head of the table. His face was blank. His lawyers, PR team, and executives? They weren't so calm. Sir, we have to respond. We need to put out a statement. We're getting death threats. The CEO exhaled slowly and leaned forward. How bad is it? A PR executive, clutching a tablet, looked up with pure panic in her eyes. Sir, our stock has dropped 12% since last night. Silence. Reservations are down 87%. The CEO clenched his jaw. Lawsuits? A lawyer nodded, adjusting his glasses. LeBron James's legal team has reached out. It's not a lawsuit yet, but if we don't handle this right. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to, because they all knew. The restaurant chain was on the verge of collapse. A carefully crafted apology was posted online within the hour. Loudspeaker official statement from restaurant name. We deeply regret the incident that took place at our establishment involving Mr. James and his son. We do not condone discrimination of any kind, and we are taking immediate steps to ensure this never happens again. The employee involved has been terminated, and we are implementing new diversity training for all staff. We sincerely apologize to Mr. James, his family, and our valued customers. The reaction? Skull skull skull. Fire. LMAOO. This is the "we're sorry we got caught" apology. Fire. Diversity training? How about hiring people who aren't garbage in the first place? Fire. You're only sorry because your business is collapsing. Too late. The damage was already done. And no amount of PR spin was going to fix it. Back at her apartment, Jessica sat motionless, staring at the wall. She had spent the last hour trying to delete every account she had. But the internet never forgets. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Speech balloon. You're a terrible person. I hope you never work again. Her heart pounded. Then, a knock at the door. Her breath caught. Slow, careful, she approached, looked through the peephole. It was her former coworker, Megan. Jessica hesitated, then opened the door a crack. Megan's eyes were full of pity. Jess, are you okay? Jessica stared at her. Then, for the first time since this started, she broke down crying. LeBron James had ignored the media requests all day. But then, he posted a single tweet. Cell phone with arrow at King James. Respect isn't about money. It's about how you treat people. I hope everyone learns something from this. Fire 1.4 million likes. Fire 13.7 million views. The world agreed with him. And as the sun set on the chaos, one thing was clear. Jessica had learned the hard way. And the restaurant? It was never recovering. By the next morning, the restaurant's CEO resigned. The restaurant closed indefinitely. And on Google? Round pushpin, permanently closed. It had taken one night to destroy everything they had built. And one lesson that the world would never forget. Fire respect everyone, or risk losing everything. Fire. Meanwhile, across town, LeBron and his son sat in a quiet diner. A place where no one cared about designer suits or luxury cars. You okay? LeBron asked. The boy stirred his milkshake. Yeah. Stuff like this happens, LeBron said. People judge, assume things. He met his son's eyes. But what matters is how you respond. The boy thought about it. You didn't yell at her. No. You didn't call her names. Nope. But you still taught her a lesson. LeBron smiled. Respect isn't about being the loudest in the room. It's about knowing your worth, and making sure others do too. The boy nodded. And just like that, the lesson was learned. By the end of the week, the restaurant issued a public apology. The manager personally called LeBron to make amends. But the damage was done. The internet never forgets. As for Jessica, she learned the hard way that a moment of arrogance can cost everything. And LeBron's son? He walked away knowing that sometimes, the best way to fight back is simply proving them wrong. The end.